It's important for you to understand that the type of cardio that you do can have varying degrees of systemic fatigue. Some are going to be more fatiguing to the entire body and more difficult to recover from than others. Now, when we talk about highly fatiguing forms of cardio, I want you to think StairMaster, jogging, extensive hikes, like very long fucking hikes. These are all forms of cardio that are going to be pretty brutal. And yes, you can get into like Jacob's ladder and like, battle ropes and like rowers. And like, those are all forms, not necessarily ones that we use like in bodybuilding or in like my small sphere of the fitness space. But those are also ones that are high intensity. They get your heart rate up. They can be very fatiguing. And realistically, should we utilize these high intensity forms? You can, yes, but we also have to consider whether or not we have, one, the tools of recovery to recover from these. Like, do we have the ability to recover in between these sessions? Two, does it make sense for the amount of cardio that we have to do? And three, are you in a state that doing a form of high intensity cardio is actually going to benefit you? So I'll tell you a story. So I have a client right now. She is bringing her weight down from 200 pounds, and she would like to get to a point where she can get back to running marathons. And historically, she has had a lot of success running and she enjoys it. She's done very well. Realistically, though, at her weight, and in the deficit that she's in, there is a ceiling for how much that she can expose herself to in terms of cardio in the form of running, like specifically like running on a treadmill or running outdoors. And this is something that on our last call we discussed, and I'm like, we have to really evaluate if asking or like demanding this from your body is going to benefit you, because there's two aspects to recovery. There's cardiovascular function and like your ability to recover, I guess, even systemically, but then there is the impact on structure and joints. And for anyone who's, nursing an injury or is going through some aches and pains or historically has had issues at the ankles, knees, hips, this could be something that you need to consider as you're selecting a form of cardio, because there are ones that have a higher degree of impact and fatigue that's going to be accrued from exposing yourself to doing this form of cardio for long durations. And in her case, I'm like, okay, so we have these three options because she's got a treadmill and a recumbent bike at home. I'm like, the recumbent bike is for the day that you wake up, because here's the caveat. She enjoys running. She likes it. She's like, it's something I want to technically do every day, but I don't think I have it in me. Like, I don't think that I can physically do it. And it's kind of defeating because I don't know when to select that as opposed to walking on the treadmill, maybe at an incline, or using the recumbent bike. So I kind of posed it this way. I was like, listen, the days that you just did a lower session, you went to see your trainer and like you come home and then the next day you wake up and you're really sore, and like getting out of bed, because she typically does cardio first thing in the morning. If that's something that even getting out of bed, stretching, moving around the house, going about your routine, if that is already something that's causing the manifestation of these like signals that you're under recovered, that, maybe you could sleep a little bit more, maybe you could take the day off lifting, that would be a sign to me that we shouldn't pick that high systemic fatiguing form of cardio. So i.e. the running, or for someone else, maybe that's StairMaster or something that's very like high intensity interval training. Now, I was like, what about on the days you wake up, maybe like you're working on knee stability, hip stability. So like the structures themselves are sore or a little like achy, but neurologically, like you're not carrying that systemic fatigue you experience after like a really heavy session. And I was like, that day still probably not going to benefit from that high impact, but maybe you can challenge yourself. Maybe you can do some intervals on the recumbent bike. Maybe you can do some walking at an incline, maybe at a moderate speed on the treadmill. So there's the stress that you incur during the run itself. Like there's the cardio session, like that can be mentally grueling, it can be physically hard, yes. But the one that people miss and they don't really pay as much attention to is the recovery needs after the cardio session. And this is one I'm like, hey, like you have to treat high highly fatiguing forms of cardio with care, because if you do a run, let's say, and then you have to work out lower later, you're probably not going to be neurologically in the same place as you would have been if you hadn't done that run. Assuming that it was a hard run, it was an intense session, which just running in general, that is very systemically fatiguing. And you have to consider that you're not going to have the recovery in the muscles that, frankly, you're going to the gym to lift with, you're going to work. So does it make sense to do something that's going to then take away from efforts later in the day? Or could we potentially position this run on a day or in between lifts where you have the ability to recover from them? And that's where I think we have to be very deliberate with the style of cardio relative to the individual's recovery capacity. And this could be diet induced or just overall their skill set and their exposure to doing high amounts or highly fatiguing forms of cardio. This all comes back to managing systemic fatigue. And how do we avoid these pitfalls, these holes that we bury ourselves in? And like, trust me, like with competing, like this is something that at a certain point, it does feel pretty inevitable. But here are some simple ways, some actionables that you can take and, think about when you're modifying or, adjusting your program in order to fit cardio in, because ultimately cardio is going to be a great method in order to increase the deficit. Yes, but we need to make sure that we're not overcommitting to a form of cardio that, one, is going to then cause this significant decline in training performance, or two, be so grueling that and very taxing, even like mentally, that you find it hard to then stick to your diet. So what I would do is alternate intensities. I would have a form of cardio that is lower intensity, and it doesn't have to be the recumbent bike. Depending on your skill and your capability, maybe that does just involve like walking on the treadmill at a flat incline. And this is where I think using your heart rate to kind of gauge like, okay, how hard am I working? I think that can be really telling. And even if you don't wear a watch, even if you don't track these things, it still is something that you can kind of finesse and like, are you able to hold a conversation while you're doing this form of cardio? Because realistically, when you're jogging, unless you're a very trained athlete, unless you have very good control of your heart rate and you're you have a high endurance, it's not going to be feasible for you to have a conversation running. Even same thing with the StairMaster. Like I got a call the other day when I was on the StairMaster and I was panting, I was out of breath. And it's because like just getting that amount of oxygen in my body at the same time while I'm also trying to perform, it's like, that's not realistic. And this is one of the ways that I gauge, okay, is this the target zone that I want to work in? And I say zone very loosely because I don't really prescribe to like, oh, you need to be in zone 1 or zone 2 or zone 3 for X amount of time. It's more so like if you can train at a moderate intensity, so enough to where you're breaking a little bit of a sweat, if you sweat, enough to where it's kind of difficult to hold a conversation, you're probably going to be good. You're probably going to be in a position where you're still burning fat, but it's not so systemically fatiguing that you are wrecked and it begins to affect your training performance. Now, I think it's important to monitor performance. So if you're finding that you start doing a form of cardio that is very systemically fatiguing and you're noticing a lot of your lifts are going down and it's very hard for you to recover, and you're seeing across the board, even like very strong movements, like indicator lifts that you're very proficient in, those are beginning to go down and like not in a negligible way. Like these are very like significant shifts in performance. This would be an indication that maybe you need to scale the modality down or the total duration. I think it's important to listen to your body. I have had serious injuries during contest preps before where I just ignored it. I disassociated. I'm like, yep, I'm just got to keep pushing through, keep going. And I think for a lot of people, they get into this routine, especially in a steep fat loss phase, because they're like, yeah, it's just mind over matter. It's just, willing myself to recover and withstand this stress. But injury is something that can be very debilitating. And it's also something that can cause you to slam on the brakes if you are in the middle of a contest prep or fat loss phase. So at all costs, we want to avoid injury. And there's a big difference between like being uncomfortable, having some aches and pains, and feeling like your body physically telling you something, like sending signals that something is wrong. And this is where I would encourage you to listen to your body. So yeah, in the case that like you are exposing yourself to a stressor and you're finding with repetition the aches and pains are getting worse and it feels more like an injury rather than just like muscular discomfort, this could very well be something that requires, a further follow-up and diagnostics to assess. But realistically, we probably need to reduce the exposure to that modality if that is in fact the trigger. So now that you can kind of think about, okay, when I place my cardio, when I do it, which I didn't really say this, but I think largely in a perfect world, if you had the ability to split up your cardio, I think that would be the best from a recovery standpoint. For most people, that is going to allow the most recovery. I also understand that's not feasible for a lot of people too, especially if you have long commutes to the gym. So now that we've covered where to plug that in, and now that we've covered different forms and how there is inherently a cost by doing these higher forms of cardio,